Hi, I am Jane McCampbell. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified EMDR therapist, and a professional life coach. And this is my mini masterclass on boundaries. In today's video, we're going to look at 3 ways of conceptualizing boundaries. And then in additional videos, we're going to look at how they play out in couple and family relationships. So the first kind of boundary that I'm going to talk about can be depicted like this. What we have here is a clear boundary that says where I end and where you begin, where my area of responsibility ends and where yours begins, depicted by these long fence panels. I can hold on to who I am, and you can hold on to who you are. And yet between those fence panels, we have some small gaps, and this is how we have relationship. We can choose to give, and we can choose to receive information, emotion, experience, physical touch, maybe sexual touch. But because these holes are quite small, we get to filter how much of that we share and how much of the others that we let in. In therapy, we call this a differentiated relationship. This means that I can hold on to the essence of who I am without becoming overwhelmed by you. I can have my own thoughts and feelings. I can have my own value system. I don't have to impose them on you, and you don't have to impose yours on me. But we get to share, and we get to be in relationship together. This is not the kind of relationship that normally brings people into therapy, however. That kind of relationship tends to look like this. This here is a diffuse boundary, leading to what we therapists call an enmeshed relationship, or sometimes, depending on the theory, a fused relationship, or simply boundaryless. What we see here is that our fence panels are really tiny, hardly there at all, maybe just stakes to put the fence panels in. And then we have these huge, great gaps where there is a whole load of sharing going on. Whether this is information, whether it's emotion, whether it's experience, whether it is physical touch, whether it is sexual touch. And in the light of this, it becomes really hard to be able to see where I end and where you begin, what's my responsibility and what's your responsibility. It can become very easy to feel overwhelmed in the presence of the other and not be able to hold on to the essence of who we are. And when we get really overwhelmed, that is what sometimes leads to the third type of boundary, which can look a little bit like this. This is a rigid boundary leading to what we therapists call a disengaged relationship, or maybe a cut-off relationship. What happens here is that we're actually in quite close proximity. And that proximity could be geographical proximity, but it could also be religious proximity or a value system proximity, that we're actually not that far apart, and yet we need to be defined by our difference. In that kind of relationship, any attempt at being able to share information or emotion or experience, physical or sexual touch, tends to just rebound off the boundary because there are no spaces through which that information can be shared. What's very interesting is that in the absence of clear boundaries up here, we often see these 2 boundaries operating together. And I'm going to show you how that works. So let's say that we have a group of people, whether this is a family, whether it's a church, whether it's a small village even. And we're all living with the same thoughts, feelings, value systems. We all get upset at the same thing. We all tut-tut at the same thing. And we can honestly say that we have some pretty diffuse boundaries going on there in between us. It's kind of hard to be able to see where one person ends and where one person begins. But we need to retain our identity. We need to retain our difference as a group. We need to keep the outside world out. And so we do that by putting a rigid boundary around the outside. That means that even though we might actually not be very far removed from our neighbors down the street, whether it's a geographical removal or whether it's an emotional removal, whether it's an ideological removal, we have to define who we are. And so we do that by keeping people on the outside, well and truly out, and if they try to get in, those attempts are just going to bounce off of the outside. And this is all very well, but the sad thing is that we can get so used to each other in here when we're not exposed to anything on the outside, it can mean that we're limited in terms of being able to grow, in terms of being able to expand, in terms of being able to have new experiences. We see this often with alcoholic family systems. What happens in an alcoholic family is that you've got a lot of confused relationships, a lot of inappropriate responsibility taking, a lot of inappropriate abdication of responsibility all within the system. And yet, the outside world doesn't necessarily know, because we work very hard to band together and keep the outside world out of our business. And should somebody dare to go to therapy and try and change and set a boundary, that becomes a severe problem because it threatens the whole identity of the group and all of the secrets and all of the ideologies that hold us together. This is one of the saddest things that happens with this kind of system, which is that when we get one person who says, you know what, this isn't hanging together for me anymore. This doesn't really fit with what I want and who I want to be. I'd like to get out there. I'd like to grow. I'd like to have some new experiences. I'm seeing that things maybe could be a little bit different. That person, when they do that, ends up inadvertently threatening the rest of the group. The anxiety in the rest of the group goes up. We can't possibly be different. Stop challenging us. We're very, very happy as we are. And so in order to try and bring this person back into line, back into the values that the whole group holds, they threaten them with saying, if you don't change, if you don't drop this quest for growth, we're going to kick you outside of relationship. We're going to kick you outside of this boundary. Now, in the wild, if we get put out of relationship, if we get kicked out of the herd, we get eaten by lions. Primarily, this is a really scary thing to do. And so sometimes that can be enough to make us give up on our quest for growth so that we can stay within the family unit. But we can often do that at the expense of our own growth, our own development, our own happiness. And that's where a lot of depression comes from, where we just kind of withdraw into ourselves and we're not actually able to stand up and be the true self that we were created to be. What's really sad is that if we could learn how to have clear boundaries where we could choose to be able to be different instead of having to be threatened by the other person's different, we would all be able to live as we were truly meant to be and be able to stay in relationship. And in subsequent videos, I'm going to talk about how that can play out in couples and families and how we can learn to do just that. Until then, I'm Jane McCampbell, and you can find me at therapyjane.com.